IT, are we live?
Yes, Madam Chair, we're live.
Thank you. So I call to order the Public Works and Utilities Committee meeting for July 1st, 2024. We are a little bit behind because of the weather. It is 5:06. Could I get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Castro,
Presente.
Counselor Garcia.
Present.
Counselor Romero Worth
I'm here.
and Counselor Lee Garcia
He's excused.
and Chair Chavez.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next is approval of the agenda. Do we have any changes from staff?
No changes.
Any concerns or input from the committee? All right, I see none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? See none, motion passes. Approval of the consent agenda. Were there any items pulled?
Not that I'm aware of.
Move to approve. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Could I get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Castro.
Sí.
Counselor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Counselor Lee Garcia is excused and Chair Chavez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Do we have?
Excuse me,
any-
Madam Chair, could I clarify who made the motion for the agenda?
I don't think we had that. I think I skipped that.
Okay.
So let's go back. Can I get a motion for approval of the agenda, please?
So moved. Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? See none, motion passes. Sorry about that. I moved too fast. Public comment. Do we have anyone from the public here to speak this evening? All right, we have no one from the public. So the next thing on our agenda is presentation and informational items, proposal to increase wastewater service rates by 4% in the FY 24-25, 25-26, 26-27, and 27-28. Jason Mumm, FCS Group, is here to present for us today.
Start. Okay. Hi. Good evening, counselors. My name is Jason Mumm. I am a managing principal with a firm called FCS Group, which is Financial Consulting Solutions Group. Our team works out of Denver, Colorado. Since approximately 1999, I have worked with the city through its various leadership groups, basically keeping a close eye on the utility rates here. Water, wastewater, and environmental services. I have not had to appear here for something in the neighborhood of 10 years and actually had to check before I came over here tonight to make sure this is exactly where you were meeting. I'm here tonight though because we do have something to discuss. We need to discuss the potential for increasing sewer rates for the city. Something that we see happening starting fiscal year 2025, which starts today. And we believe that those sewer rates will need to increase approximately 4% per year for the next 4 fiscal years due to a couple of main drivers. One is financing and the funding to support a new wastewater treatment facility. And another is to address the rising costs of operations and maintenance in the sewer department. We did evaluate 2 different scenarios for financing, and I'll talk about them both. However, the difference between them is not very large. And I'll explain the differences here as we go on, but 4% would be the appropriate motion to consider. I'll go through some of the drivers here. The first one, I talked about 2, the operations and maintenance expenses for sewer. And I also talked about the financing for the wastewater treatment facility that is proposed. And first thing I want to show you here is our projection of the operations and maintenance expenses. What the chart is showing you is last year's forecast, because we keep an eye on this every year. That's the dark blue bar that you see there versus this year's forecast, which is the light green bar. There's a substantial difference. The operating expenses increased over last year's forecast due to a very high hit on inflationary items in the department and real cost increases as well. The airport lease being one of them, very expensive. Service contracts, supplies, and transfers all going up much higher than we had seen in the year before. This chart here is the capital improvements plan, the difference between last year's forecast and this year's forecast. The thing I'd like to point out to you is those last two green bars in the final 2 years. That is the first sort of phase of the wastewater treatment facility that we have in our plan right now. Those capital improvements are going to increase about $60 million inside of this 5-year plan, but it's more like $120 million in total for the first couple of phases. I don't even think we have all the phases in our plan just yet. But for this next 5-year period that we're looking at here, the impact is about $60 million in additional spending. Like I said, we looked at 2 different approaches for financing that. Actually, we looked at more than that, but these are the 2 that kind of surfaced as the smartest approaches. In scenario 1, it includes borrowing more money, and scenario 2 includes borrowing less money. The first scenario there, we would borrow about $78 million here within this 5-year time frame, out of a total of about $138 million that would be borrowed. That would cause the increases to go up by 4%. That second scenario includes using more of wastewater's cash reserves to pay for the plant and borrowing less money, about $20 million less money, all in all. And that would save a little bit on the rate increases, about 3.75 versus 4. Not a huge difference, but a difference nonetheless. The financing program that we have in mind for the plant is a program that the State Revolving Fund is putting together for Santa Fe and some other larger borrowers in the state. Another one of my clients has also been able to use this program, but it's a low interest loan program available at 0.01% interest, so virtually no interest. The loan terms can be up to 30 years, and there's no penalty for early payment to pay it all off whenever you need to or want to. I think one of the main features of this program that I find to be very advantageous is that the repayment for the debt does not commence until after the project has been completed. That can have a really important effect on the rates. Normally, when we're dealing with revenue bonds, municipal revenue bonds, we have to get the repayments started immediately, and that gives us less time to do modest adjustments to rates to catch up with the debt service requirements. So this program actually allows you to do more, and it has the advantage of extremely low interest for sure, but that flexible repayment schedule is almost more advantageous. So the $138 million in capital projects have been identified for this funding, including the treatment facility. But there's $15 million for the UV disinfection equipment, $3 million for the sewer line rehabilitation fund, and then $120 million for that new treatment facility. Within that 5-year period, we're not borrowing all that amount, we're only borrowing some of it. The program would remain open, however, so you would have access to those funds, even though in the next 5 years we wouldn't use it all. The line would remain open for you for those other projects in the future. Well, let's take a look at what the projected debt outstanding would be under these approaches. The dark blue, again, is last year's forecast. The green one there is scenario 1. That's the one with more debt, and the mauve color there is the one with less debt. I think where everything takes shape the most is there at the far right of the chart. That's where you see the projected outstanding principal balance on the debt. And you can see with that green one, you're going to be borrowing more money, so the balance will be higher. And with the sort of pink colored one, you'd be borrowing less, the balance would be lower, but both of them are substantially more than we were thinking of last year at this time. That leads to an annual debt service obligation that, of course, is going to grow. And it will grow from about 1.8 million is where we expected it to be. That's due to wastewater's already outstanding debts. Those will increase a little bit only for that time frame, and that's because we can defer some of this repayment to future years until after the project is completed. So we don't have to increase the debt service too quickly. One of the things we have to be careful with debt service of any kind is whether or not we're meeting the appropriate coverage ratios for it. What coverage really means, and it's a lot more important for municipal revenue bonds, is that when you subtract your operating expenses from your revenue, you have enough money to pay the debt and some additional amount that's usually defined in the debt service covenants.
Hold on real fast. IT, are we okay to continue, or do you need to do anything on your end before we continue?
I will have to restart the live stream, Madam Chair.
All right, we'll just pause for a
Power
moment.
surge there for a moment.
Let us know when we're back online, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Madam Chair, we're still live.
Thank you so much. All right, those rejoining from the public, we had to reconnect because of the weather. We are going to continue with our presentation. All right, I'll turn it over to our presenter again. Sorry about that interruption.
No problem. Thank you very much. I was talking about debt service coverage and what that was, and I'll just recap for just a moment, get us all back. When you take your operating expenses and subtract them from your revenue, you're left with a net revenue. You divide that by your total debt service, and that gives you a ratio. With municipal revenue bonds, normally the banks are looking for something in the neighborhood of 1.25 or higher. For Santa Fe, for many, many years, we have managed to a 1.5 coverage ratio. And your debt service coverage has historically been even better than that. One of the things I'm very proud of actually is the high financial performance of these utilities during the time in which I've been involved with them. We just were reaffirmed at a AA rating, I believe it was AA plus rating earlier this year. And I think that's wonderful, but the debt service coverage ratio is one of the major indicators that your lenders are looking for that. Now, with this loan program from the state of New Mexico, the coverage requirement isn't very high, but there still is one. It's 1.1 times. And you've covered that easily with your current operating and with the rates that we're proposing. One of the other things that we keep a close eye on is how much cash is going to be available for the utilities. Last year's forecast, you can see that the plan was not to really borrow money, but to draw down that fund balance. So that dark blue line is being drawn down to that red dash line. That red dash line is sort of the minimum reserve that we would recommend the sewer utility to hold in cash. And so we were drawing that down. And that's what we had last year. Now with this year's forecast, because of the lending program that we have available, the idea is to preserve that cash and earn a rate of return on that while we are paying just 0.01% interest for the debt that is proposed from the state. So these approaches here kind of make more financial sense for the utility. It leaves you with more cash to have on hand to deal with things that are, say, unplanned emergencies or something that might come up that could disturb the revenue stream. You wouldn't have to go and do, say, an emergency rate increase or anything like that. You have plenty of cash in the bank. And what this last one is showing is what do we need in terms of the total revenue required. So with our operating and maintenance expenses and debt service and other costs all taken into account, we can see that from last year's forecast, again in the dark blue, to the new ones, under either of the two scenarios, we're looking at almost virtually the same number. The rate increase for scenario one still is 4%. It's slightly less under that other scenario. But they're both very, very close to one another. And so that's what's going to be needed in order to pay for the operating and maintenance expenses as we see them today, and to finance this wastewater treatment plant facility that's being proposed. And that's really the extent of my presentation for you tonight. Love to answer any questions. If we have very, very detailed questions, I might need to get back to you, but I can probably answer most of your questions.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Mr. Mum, is there any questions from the committee? Counselor Michael Garcia?
Appreciate this presentation. Just quick question, besides taking this loan out, or were there any other options considered going into this study?
Financing options?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so we looked at two very purposeful approaches. One was really to just use the debt financing the way that scenario one paints for us. The second scenario was an attempt to try to use more of the cash reserves in order to finance it. But what we found was that we were going to have to increase the rates anyway to take care of the remaining financing and the operations and maintenance expenses. The operations and maintenance expenses themselves are pushing a pretty important part of this increase. You can go back and look through the charts, or I can go through them now if you want. The increase in operations and maintenance expenses is almost $4 million annually, and we have to make that up regardless of the financing scenario. So the difference in the financing turned out to not be that big of a difference at all. It really had to do with a preference, which way you want to go. I think the approach that staff is preferring is to use the state lending program as much as we can, 0.01% interest, virtually free money, and continue to keep your cash in its bank account. Even though it doesn't earn a huge amount of interest, it's more than zero, and seems to make the most sense.
Okay, thank you so much. And I will admit I have a challenge with using the term virtually free money, because we got to repay it back at point,
course.
right? So,
Yeah.
so it's not free money, it's at no interest, but it's the city's money that will ultimately be expended. So Director Dupuy, I got a follow-up for you. Have any grant funds been explored by your department?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, they have, and they've been included in the model to reduce the amount of the total that we would need for lending. We just anticipate the lending being more than the first modular build out or complete rehab of the facility, knowing that that's a first meaningful step. Then the anticipated rate increases over time can be adjusted, because we run these analysis every year and a comprehensive analysis every 3 years.
Okay. And the reason I ask is I've been having some discussions with Commissioner Green, Santa Fe County Commissioner Green, and we've been discussing what options are there for us to get this funded without a loan. And through that exploration, the EPA has available funding. And if we were to partner up with the county and develop what they call a regional solution, that would qualify a development, like a rebuild of the plant, $300 million. There is a 20 to 25% match that would come along with that funding, but that's far less of a payout on behalf of the city than $100 million. And so my question is, can we explore that option before we dip into taking on this loan? Is the way I look at it, and maybe to put it in simplistic terms for the public, is we wouldn't want to take the burden on of a student loan without applying for financial aid. And I guess the question is, have we applied for any grants, any type of funding? Because I know it's out there. I mean, it just in these initial discussions with Commissioner Green, the EPA is willing to come to the table and help us with this challenge. I don't know what discussions have been had, what haven't been had, and how can we move towards a solution that's going to come at a less cost to the taxpayers, but still end us at the end solution where we have a brand new facility that supports not only the city of Santa Fe, but the entire region, because I mean, we're growing. And once we have folks start tapping into the system, more and more development, I mean, the need is there. And if the resources are there, especially on the federal level, I would hate for us to say, well, we're going to go take this loan when we could have left $300 million on the table elsewhere.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Garcia, Councilor Garcia, one of the discussions I had with Commissioner Green as well was about the same program. I'm very open to anyone's advice and insight into funding opportunities, and we pursue everyone, including this particular one. One of the benefits of having the Clean Water State Revolving Fund as a funding source is it gives us the validation that we can proceed because we have the funding available to us immediately. But if we don't take that funding to actually make a payment, then we don't have to start repayment. And the repayment can be as flexible as 1 year after. So ultimately, it gives us the flexibility to proceed immediately versus having to wait for the grant funding to come in. And, there's the state match program that was just created. And, obviously, if we can get something from the federal government with the 25% match, we'd be pursuing the state funding to meet the match. And even with, which I do not anticipate is feasible, but even if we didn't have to come out of the rate revenues to fund 1 penny of the new facility, we would still need to pursue the rate increase because of the additional operating costs that Mr. Mum was describing. So we've been very cautious in anticipating as much flexibility as possible so we can continue to do the work we need to do while giving us the flexibility to minimize the impact to the ratepayers.
And so I guess my follow-up to that is, and I'm glad because my follow-up to you is going to be there's the state resource for match. So it would be pretty much no money, not even a loan. It would literally be that at no cost scenario. Now, I guess the follow-up to your explanation is how can we be able to plan to, let's work on getting a new facility up and running, begin to apply, that way we make sure we don't leave those resources on the table, utilize any potential loans, and then quickly pivot to grant funding. Is that feasible? I mean, I guess that
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's exactly how we intend it. Ultimately, this funding is actually better than us spending our cash reserve. So we make some small interest on our cash reserve, which is much better than what we're achieving in terms of a loan payment. And then it provides us that flexibility. Ultimately, if we took some of that loan, we could pay it off early with our cash reserve. And then we would obviously work with Mr. Mum to determine the best possible range of options, but we would have those options.
okay. And Mr. Mummer, Director, I don't know who this would be best to answer, but it seemed like from the presentation, the repayment of the loan was a main reason for the increase year after year after year. And can we get a projection in regards to if we were to, because again, I don't believe this presentation took into consideration any grant funding. It was, we're going to take this loan out and pay for it. This is how we're going to pay back the loan. I would like to see a forecast in regards to where we have that hybrid process where we take out a loan just to get the ball rolling, then get funding, and not have to have over a multiple year process, $12 a year. I mean, and that might not seem a lot, but for a senior citizen who is on Social Security and have their water bill go up by $12 a month, that is a lot. And any way we can minimize that, I would like to be able to have that projection and forecast to show to the public, look, we're gonna go after this loan. But if we're successful in this grant, it's not gonna end up costing you $12 in 5 years. It's gonna end up costing you maybe $4 in 5 years. And that's because of, as we had mentioned, the costs of inflation, product, everything else that requires us to raise it. I think, so I guess, Mr. Mum, is that possible to get these numbers if we went after the loan? Because I seriously think this is something we need to begin to explore and know that it's not a viable option, because from my understanding, it's a completely viable option to get the money from the feds.
So to answer your question, Counselor, we do have some grants in our projections right now, but they would be grants that the wastewater has already been awarded. So those are in there. I think what you're talking about is grants that might be awarded under different programs. We can certainly do that. I'm not aware of the program. I just need to learn more about what you have in store there. We can run that for sure. I would also say, though, that the reason for the increase is the bigger reason was the operations and maintenance expenses that we went over. There is a debt service that would be also a factor, but the larger of the two was the operations and maintenance.
So, and correct me if I'm hearing you wrong, no matter if we took on this loan or not, there is going to be an increase in residents' water utility bill. We don't know what it's going to be, but okay.
We may be able to reduce it if the grants are generous enough, but we still have to meet the operations and maintenance expense increases.
Okay, and that's helpful, because I think I definitely would like to see it factored in where, I mean, it's $300 million. That's not a small amount of resources. That's triple what we're looking at for the loan. So it can really help us develop and the intention is to have a regional plan. And I think we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the residents to begin to look at this. So Director Dupuy, you and I can have a conversation offline, but I want to make sure that we begin to at least apply, submit an application and see where we can go with this. They might deny us, they might say, here's some resources. But, okay, well, thank you for the presentation, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Director Dupuy. No other questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Before it slips my mind, I think a good presentation, Director Dupuy, is that we have a breakdown of that inflation trend in regards to maintenance and operation. I think we're speaking about it in a very broad way right now. And I think for us to really get down to details so the public understands what we're really talking about when we're talking about maintenance and operations and what those increases look like, especially if it's going to affect their utility bill. I also
Madam Chair, if I could just respond to that.
Yeah.
And Mr. Mum can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen it in our model where it has those increases over the years and then the projection into the future of what we expect the increases to be. And we're meaningfully conservative because we've noticed that there is a decline in the increase of inflation we've seen recently. So we don't continue that trend into the future either. So we can break that out separately. And if it's possible, we'll try and bring it to the next committee.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And I think just like the current trend, focusing on that, I think our public knows that there's inflation. I think we're aware, we go to the grocery store, we see it. But I think when it's going to affect them at home, we need to give them a breakdown of why they're going to be seeing that on our end in regards to covering the cost for inflation with maintenance and operations. So if we could give them what we've kind of seen already, just so that they understand why we're predicting this need would be good. Okay, Counselor Romero-Worth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to clarify a couple things. The increases that are being considered here are for wastewater only, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So we're not talking about the money we pay to have water for our sinks and
No, not in this presentation.
drinking.
no.
Okay. So I just want to make sure we're being really clear that this is wastewater only. What's the timing? So you have in here FY 2025, which we are now in, today's July 1st, first day. What's the timing on this?
Well, we wanted to get this to council as soon as possible, in the event that, well, because the operations and maintenance expenses are already upon us. Also, in order to get the rates in place to support the debt financing that will come, we want to get that done as soon as possible. My understanding is that staff wants to move forward with this expeditiously. That's why I'm here tonight. I believe I'm scheduled to be at council on July 10th as well.
Okay. And so this increase is 4% in each of the next 4 fiscal years. So, correct? So it's 16% at the end of 4 years, but there's a compounding there, correct? How do you explain that?
No, that's correct. You have it right.
Okay, and do you have I think to one of Counselor Garcia's points, do you have the breakout of what this looks like to individuals' bills, like whether you're a family or you're a,
I don't have that tonight, but I could have it by July 10th if we're going to go to council as planned.
yeah, I think we need to understand what that rate increase is going to feel like for members of the community specifically. I also think, so if you're telling us that this is what's required over the next 4 years, what number are you using, and I think this is probably for Director Dupuy, as the total cost of a revised, updated, however you're referring to it, wastewater treatment plant?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Worth, we project out the cost per year. And if Ms. Moan could help me, the amounts that we have in the tail years is ultimately because we don't have our debt service come due until after the project is complete. I wanted to be conservative and have some amount in there in the forthcoming years, but we don't have the full amount.
Right, but I'd like to know, so you're looking at, as Counselor Counselor Chavez said, I mean, one of the factors you're looking at is inflation over time and just the fact that, you know, chemicals and whatnot are getting more and more expensive, and they're actually getting really expensive. So, but then you're also looking at the cost of a new treatment plant. And so I'm curious what number you're playing with. When we still haven't seen the study that's being done to say, here are your options in terms of these are the different things you could build. So you're guessing on something. I'd like to know what that is, even if it's a partial cost, just to reflect kind of the finance.
Madam Chair, Councilor Worth, it's a minimal amount. The amount for the first module on a complete reconstruction or a rehab is 120 million or more. That's the number we used in anticipation that that repayment schedule from borrowing that amount would hit in the future years. That portion was brought in with some funding from any known grant subsidies like a state appropriation or others that we've received. The additional item that isn't in here is the recent approval for emergency administrative order response funding, which is 8 million. So we will, and ultimately the work that we're doing there has some overlap with whatever option we choose moving forward. And we've just fast tracked that work that has an immediate impact and is well understood. But ultimately we are paying into some of those future expenses already. So it's not, even if we got a grant fund for the full amount of a reconstruction, we will expend significant funds and significant within probably 20 million in the next 3 years.
Right, but what I'm trying to, what I want to see is like the 20,000 foot level. And I understand that that we don't have a complete picture yet. and that we're making some guesses. And but 120 million, so if it's that's what portion of a complete rebuild is 120 million?
It's one module, which would be about a third with 2 million gallons a day, which is the amount that we've committed for downstream flows with the WEG settlement.
Third.
Can I just add something, Counselor Marlworth? I feel like too, in going back here, and I'm just saying this, I think that we also as a city have to be transparent if we're not sure how high these costs are gonna be, or if these costs are unpredictable. I think we need to be able to say that and why. I think with inflation, we don't know. I think that with the rebuilds, there are some unknowns as well. I feel like we need to be pretty transparent about what those unknowns are. I know that we're making predictions, but I think we need to share those predictions, but I think we also need to be very honest with the community and the fact that we may not know the details of what that cost may be, which also goes back to Councilor Garcia's point and the fact that that's why grants and looking for other funding is going to be consistently important, because the loan itself is not going to fix the issue or address all the issues that we're trying to take care of in regards to the wastewater plant.
So let's see. I guess it would be helpful too, to Counselor Chavis's point, is, you know, when we're thinking about this, and I know we don't have all the information, and yet we're having to start because we have a plant that's not operating optimally. So we've got to start somewhere. But it would be helpful to see maybe a pie chart of, okay, this is, you know, and maybe, Mr. Bum, because of your experience helping municipalities with these kinds of projects, like what is the typical breakout? Like what proportion of should we anticipate has to be through financing in terms of a loan? What is typically available to municipalities in terms of their state legislature's ability to fund versus the federal government's ability to fund versus the ratepayers, you know, so just kind of like looking at here's the world. This is how you finance. This is how you rebuild these things when you come to this moment of needing to do it. I think it would help to understand what proportion of all those things, because I think we're going to need them all. But typically, you know, what should we anticipate? And, you know, maybe you can't guess specifically about us because we don't have all the information yet, but maybe you can say, here's a community that's similar, you know, this is what happened here, just to, you know, give us, because otherwise I feel like we're just sort of, you know, walking through the forest and it's a little dark.
I can actually respond to that if you'd like. So almost all of my clients are put in a situation similar to this at some point or another. You know, I talk a lot with my clients about how capital intensive these utilities can be.
Right.
They very much are. So borrowing and having access to capital markets is extremely important. And I would say that up until very recent history, there isn't really a lot of money available from state and federal sources for these kinds of things, and that communities, and we've done this here too, is to make sure that you do have great access to credit markets. That's why we make sure that the credit rating is so high. But borrowing the money is the normal route. Usually that's done, has been historically done through municipal revenue bonds. More recently, some of the programs at the state and federal level have become more attractive. So you mentioned EPA earlier, Counselor. The WIFIA program from EPA has become very popular. It's a very low interest lending program. If you can get involved with that, there are some advantages. But your state has gone, and WIFIA has actually expanded into the states to offer more financing through the state revolving funds. That's what is funding a good part of this program that the state is doing here in New Mexico. In addition to unprecedented grant making that's happened at the federal level due to the two major bills that were signed by the administration in the last couple of years. So that money is out there and available, as you say. It's just a matter of who's going to get it and how. And the way that I like to approach those questions is take charge of your own destiny, go out, make sure that you have the financing lined up. If you do get those grants, you can use them to pay off those loans. And then you can move forward from there. But if you wait for those grants to finally come to you, you may be waiting a very long time. It all depends on the program that you're involved with and how competitive it is.
And I think that goes to Director Dupuy's point earlier, which is if we can get this loan and we can get it approved, we may be able to do that faster than a grant. And if we have it, we can get underway because we have essentially the funds to be able to move forward. So this is an important exercise. I just think but back to the raising rates is never popular. And so us being able to make the case, and maybe even understanding the difference in terms of how much is going into operations and maintenance versus how much is going into the capital cost of rebuilding and what those estimates are. Okay, so we're working with a figure of 120 million, which may be only a third of the total cost of what is eventually spent. We don't know yet. We haven't made a decision about what we're doing exactly, but because of this plant that's not functioning optimally, we are in a place where we have got to start taking steps, and we know we have a big lift ahead, but we just don't have all the pieces. So it's kind of, we're trying to move forward in the best way that we can based on what we know now. And so that's kind of the tricky thing, which I think we need to be clear about, that we don't have all the answers yet, and that there is a need to move forward. I guess, Director Dupuy, you mentioned $8 million in the emergency funding. On this slide, on page, I think it's slide 6, this 138 million in capital projects has been identified. Is that 8 million in here somewhere? Or is that in addition?
Madam Chair, Councilor Merriworth, it's in addition to that 8.
Okay.
Or that 8 is in addition to that slide of 138 million.
And so is that 8 million factored into your model? Or is that kind of a?
Madam Chair, Councilor Merriworth, it is not.
Okay.
It's truly an emergency project that we brought forward,
Okay.
knowing we anticipated that there's some overlap with a new treatment facility. One of the things from a mentor of mine that was brought to my attention is that if you don't prepare the operators for the facility of the future and you just hand it over, you'll have problems. And so part of it is whether we do a rehab or a new facility. Ultimately, they need to be familiar with operating a facility that runs on a panel, not by walking around and observing and doing the controls from the field.
Okay. And just while I have you, one other quick question. How soon will our facility be back in compliance? How often is it in compliance now?
Madam Chair, Councilor Merriworth, we are much more regularly in compliance. We've had bits and spurts of being in compliance this past month. I think 3 weeks ago, we had the pressure filters brought online, and then the traveling bridge sand filters. I think we're waiting for some electronic components so that it can start running, but the sand is in place. It's ready to start working besides that control equipment. And so I'm hopeful that'll be in the next 2 weeks, and it'll be much more regular in terms of being in compliance. That's really just a Band-Aid, just caveating it. What we need is something that's not a rental, not 60 years old, that we just put back together so that we can have some redundancy and support on the existing configuration, but getting our processes into control, which has also been being accomplished through the help from Hazen and Sawyer and their team. They just finished a weeks-long intense lab analysis and sampling effort that our staff was overly helpful with. It's been a great interaction with them. So it should only continue to get better.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Castro.
Yes, indeed. Some folks did take my question, so I wanted to be clear that this was wastewater and not the water that we're using in our utility bill. I did have a question about city programs and options for folks who are on a fixed income and cannot afford some of these utility bills. Do we have any options for those folks?
Madam Chair, Councilor Castro, we do. We have an entire list of support entities, and we immediately, if someone says they have any kind of an issue paying the bill, work with them to utilize those agencies.
That's wonderful. And so if you wouldn't mind emailing me that list, I would love to have it on hand for some constituents. What about some of the infrastructure needs? I know that there was parts of the city that still needed to be hooked up to wastewater treatment. Has that been resolved?
Madam Chair, Councilor Castro, we do have 2 projects in the queue, one that just finished, and we funded some of that directly, even though we had forthcoming funding from the state, because we didn't want to have any delay in people realizing the benefits of being connected.
Perfect. Thank you for the update. Thank you so much, Mr. Mum, and no more questions from me.
Thank you, Counselor Castro. Great discussion. I think the bottom line is we just need to bring some more information forward. I think any unknowns, any questions that the community might have this would be a good platform to just get ahead of that. So that we have a resource to kind of point them to get some of those questions answered. We do have partnerships with great agencies, and our nonprofits in general in the city of Santa Fe help with utilities. I'm sure those are some of the agencies you're referencing, Director Dupuy. So there is support, and so maybe we could be public with that as well with those increases. It would be great to know, and you could just let me know when we could get a presentation in regards to the trend we're seeing with operations and maintenance. And I know Councilor Castro kind of mentioned this, we know, and we had a presentation from Mr. Dozier about kind of like our Band-Aid fixes on this facility for years now. And so I think really giving information on maintenance and operations and how there's this fact that we need to bring this facility so it's no longer Band-Aids, but those maintenance or those improvements we're making are sustainable and we're doing it the right way. Because I think that's what the community wants, right? If we do things right, then we're not kind of putting all this effort and energy and money into a facility that keeps breaking because we're not doing anything that comes with longevity in regards to being fixed. So any information in that realm, I think would be helpful to the community. It would be helpful to us as those questions come forward as well. All right. Thank you, Director Dupuy. Thank you, Mr. Mum. I appreciate you being here. All right, next on the agenda, I believe, is matters from staff. We will go to you, Director Wheeler. What do you have for us to?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. No matters from staff at this time.
All right, Director Dupuy.
No matters from Director Dupuy. Thank you.
Thank you. Any matters from the committee? Yes. No? Counselor Castro?
We won't see each other before the 4th of July. So happy 4th of July.
Yes, happy 4th of July. Please have a safe 4th of July. Matters from chair. Next meeting is Monday, July 22nd. Everyone get home safely with this weather, and have a good evening.